Hey everyone, your boy Renzi Benzi is back. As you all know, I've been to Australia several times already. It's one of my favorite countries in the world. I mean, Australia has a lot to offer. However, the only thing that I hate about Australia is that it is home to numerous species of spiders, which I really hate. But let's not talk about spiders. Well, speaking of Australia, I've been to Sydney and Melbourne 4 times, both. I really love those cities. Each of the cities has its own characters, which I really love. Sometimes I love Sydney, sometimes I love Melbourne, sometimes I love both. Yeah, but most people would ask this philosophical question: which one is better, Sydney or Melbourne? Well, if a Sydney-sider asked me that question, I would definitely answer Sydney. If a Melburnian asked me that question, I would answer Melbourne. So in this video, I'm going to compare Sydney and Melbourne based on these categories, which are based on my experience traveling to those cities. Now let's get on to it. Both Sydney and Melbourne enjoy the temperate climate. So it means to say that they experience 4 seasons: the spring, summer, fall, and winter. But according to Köppen-Geiger classification, Sydney has a humid subtropical climate with warm summers, cool winters, and uniform rainfall throughout the year. While Melbourne is a temperate oceanic climate with warm to hot summers and cool winters. And Melbourne is well known for its changeable weather conditions, mainly due to being located at the boundary of hot inland areas and cool southern ocean. That being said, Melbourne can experience 4 seasons in one day. I mean, that's super crazy. That's the reason why Melburnians can't stop talking about how crazy the weather is. But Sydneysiders, they really don't care about the weather, if I'm not mistaken. So if you really want to experience 4 seasons in one day, go to Melbourne. Otherwise, if you want to enjoy the tropical climate during the summer season, go to Sydney because they have so many beaches there. But fair warning, during the summer season, Melbourne can be really hot, from 40 degrees during the daytime. By nighttime, it plunges to 18 degrees. In Sydney, it's a bit more stable, most especially when you're at the CBD area. However, when you go to the west suburbs like Penrith, Blacktown, Parramatta, the differences between the temperature of the CBD versus the western suburbs can be really high. During the summer season, the temperatures at the western suburbs can reach as high as 45 degrees Celsius because, you know, it's far from the coastal area. So yeah, the summer season in Australia, in a nutshell, can be really hot. Sydney may not be the capital city of Australia, but it's the largest city in Australia. It is home to 5.2 million people, and Melbourne is trailing behind at 4.9 million. Almost half of the total population of the continent resides in Sydney and Melbourne. These cities may be similar to each other, but each has its own character and personality. Sydney is like your outgoing and showy friend who loves to treat you to extravagant restaurants, while Melbourne is your hipster and introvert friend. Now, according to the 2019 Global Liveability Index made by the Economist Intelligence Unit, Melbourne remains at the number 2 spot as the most livable city in the world. Sydney, on the other hand, rose 2 spots from 5th to 3rd. Now, I am talking a stiff competition here. They're really competitive, aren't they? Both cities has well-known bars, coffee shops, and retail shops. But what makes Melbourne stand out from the rest is their local cafe and coffee culture. I don't know why. Maybe it's attributed to a significant number of immigrants from Italy who carried their food and coffee culture to Melbourne. So that's really interesting. Although Sydney's local cafe culture has been thriving in recent years, it can never surpass what Melbourne has to offer. Now, if you're looking for a great place for a food trip, Melbourne is the place to be. There are so many shops and restaurants hidden at their laneways, so it's a great discovery to just roam around Melbourne CBD and try their local eats. Growing up in the Philippines, nightlife in my home country can be a real definition of a party. However, in Australia, people there still sleep. Like, seriously. At 10 p.m, the streets in Sydney and Melbourne are deserted. Well, except during that time when I went to Sydney during the first night of Vivid Sydney. At 11 p.m, there are still a lot of people at the Circular Quay. Popular night spots are found at King's Cross, Oxford Street, Circular Quay, and The Rocks. Melbourne is more exciting as you can just enjoy a glass of beer at Yarra River. It's definitely cheaper, and it closes late. Traveling around the city can be really fun, most especially if the mass transportation system is very efficient. Now take this for example. Sydney's Kingsford Smith International Airport is connected by a train. This train will lead you to the central station, and from there, you can go literally almost every corner of Sydney. From there, it's relatively easy to go around Sydney, including its western suburbs, and the only drawback riding a train from the airport to central station is its price. It's $17, even if Central Station is only 4 stations away. Melbourne's Tullamarine Airport doesn't have a train connection to the city, which really sucks. I mean, you're an international airport, why don't you have a train station? It really baffles me. Your only options are riding a taxi or Uber, which costs around $40 to $50 from Tullamarine Airport to Central Business District of Melbourne, or you can ride the Skybus. The Skybus is available 24/7. You can purchase tickets online. The round-trip ticket, if I'm not mistaken, it's approximately 37 Australian dollars, so it's a bit cheaper compared to taking a cab. But I've heard that the Victorian government has an ambitious plan to connect Tullamarine and Essendon airports all the way to Central Business District by train, and the construction is said to commence at year 2022, so hopefully this will make the transportation between Tullamarine and Essendon airports to Central Business District easier. But the only thing that I really love about Melbourne is they have a very extensive tram system. Actually, it's one of the largest tram networks in the world. And also, when you ride the tram at the Central Business District, it's free. I mean, you don't need to tap your Myki card for it. Who loves free rides, right? But however, in Sydney, they don't have any free tram zones, so that kind of sucks. So if you want to save some money, you can just, walk around and hopefully you won't get lost. But both Sydney and Melbourne's Central Business Districts are not that super big, so it's not that hard to navigate around. Now, if you're an expat living in Australia, Sydney is the most expensive city in Australia. Yeah, I can attest to that because when I went there, the average meal cost like around $18, whereas in Melbourne, it's only like $12 or $13. So Sydney is ridiculously expensive. The average weekly rent of a 1-bedroom apartment in Sydney is $200. It gets cheaper if you're planning to rent somewhere in the western suburbs. However, the price skyrockets in Mosman, Manly, Milsons Point, and Tamarama. Well, what do you expect? You're paying for the view of Sydney Harbour. Meanwhile, in Melbourne, the average weekly rent of a 1-bedroom apartment is $150. And also, the food in Melbourne, as what I've mentioned earlier, costs around $10 to $15, whereas the same quality in Sydney, it's $18 to $22. So, I don't know why, but it really is more expensive to live in Sydney than in Melbourne. Sydney and Melbourne's geography are quite similar to each other. Sydney is surrounded by mountains to the west. Melbourne is generally a flatland and valley, with Tasman Sea to the south. Okay, let's get this straight. Sydney is the sure winner for this category. You know why? Sydney's beaches are so picturesque that I won't get tired of taking photos of it. Also, the areas of Bondi, Tamarama, and Coogee beaches faces the east, hence offering a majestic view of sunrise. While the sunset at Melbourne's St Kilda Beach is also dramatic, beaches in Melbourne are rather, for the lack of better adjective, boring. To be fair, both cities have glorious mountains to trek or simply to visit. Sydney's Blue Mountain is one of Australia's national parks. It is one of the most visited places in Sydney. Melbourne's Mount Buller is a popular tourist destination as well. Sydney is the host of several festivals throughout the year. The city's New Year's Eve celebrations are the largest in Australia. The Royal Easter Show is held every year at Sydney Olympic Park. Sydney Festival is Australia's largest art festival. The Travelling Rock Music Festival, Big Day Out, originated in Sydney. The city's 2 largest film festivals are the Sydney Film Festival and Tropfest. Vivid Sydney is an annual outdoor exhibition of art installations, light projections, and music. The Sydney Mardi Gras has commenced ever since in February 1979. On the other hand, Melbourne celebrates a wide variety of annual cultural events and festivals of all types, including the Melbourne International Arts Festival, Melbourne International Film Festival, Melbourne International Comedy Festival, Melbourne Fringe Festival, and Moomba, Australia's largest free community festival. The city also hosts major annual international events such as Australian Open, Australian Grand Prix, and the Melbourne Cup. You know what? Residents of Sydney and Melbourne have been engaging in a seemingly non-existent competition about who's better between them.
No, I am the better, mate. Nah, mate, I'm the better city.
Now, the big question is, which one is better? Sydney or Melbourne? Nah, might as well visit these two and find out which city best suits you. So if you like this video, don't forget to punch those like and subscribe buttons so that YouTube will know that I'm doing a great job here. Once again, this is your boy Renzi Benzi saying adios amigos. Bye.